welcome everybody to PSSA. I don't know if y'all are aware if like some of you guys are waiting for classes, but this is Political Science Student Association. We're having a big meeting today because we're covering the First Amendment and the Constitution for lead up into Constitution Week and Constitution Day, where there is a big event on campus on the 17th that we're helping support. That is being led up by SGA and multiple student organizations, including some great people like Olivia, who has been helping out with professors a lot and preparing for this event. So this is a great way for just like open speech and topic between people about how we feel about our First Amendment rights, especially on campus. We also have pocket constitutions that are on this table. If you guys want like a little constitution, please come over here and grab them. We like ordered a bunch for Constitution Week, so take them if you want. Feel free to like start talking, conversing.
Okay, for those of you who have not been to one of these before, first of all, welcome. I'm always the voice behind the thing here, so I should show up. We do this every week, every Wednesday at noon. By the way, just a quick thing, because we have so many people, please try to keep the aisles clear so they can go through. Same thing across here. But other than that, make yourselves comfortable. We do have this lobby reserved, so we do have the right to be here. I'm going to pass around an attendance sheet eventually, whether you're here or not for this. If you sign it, that will document your attendance. And there is a column for faculty names. If you put a faculty name, and I can read your handwriting, I will contact that faculty member to document your attendance. I can't guarantee they'll do anything for you about it, but I can document it to them. So hopefully you can get some kind of credit for attending this. And again, we do this every week. We are going to be live streaming it over our YouTube channel. And so we do have a good microphone here, but especially if you want to speak up from around the outer regions of the lobby there, please be sure to speak up as loud as possible.
Also, I should probably do an introduction because I see a lot of new faces. My name's Anita. I am the club president. And then Cavalli here is our faculty advisor. Millie and Marilyn are our social media team. And then Sedona and Nicholas is our co-vice presidents. So we're like kind of the team behind our club meeting here. So if you guys also have questions or stuff afterwards or want to be more involved, please reach out.
Okay, who wants to start the conversation going? Oh, good, okay.
What's the First Amendment say? Congress shall make no law representing establishing religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abiding the freedom of speech or press or the right of people, peaceful assembly, and to petition the government for release of grievances. Basically, the government can't have a law that says the government can't say that. They can make a law that prevents you from having free speech. But then again, what constitutes free speech? You're allowed to hold protests, but if you cite violence, for example, then you'll be arrested.
Yeah, what the First Amendment means is that you cannot be punished solely for your speech, with a couple of exceptions. The exception for dangerous speech that is demonstrably, in other words, the evidence, the burden of proof is on the government, speech that demonstrably incites violence, okay, or obscene speech. And how we define those things, still up in the air after all these centuries. But with those exceptions, there are a couple of other small exceptions, but with those exceptions, the government cannot punish you for your speech. Now, they can regulate where speech can occur. So in other words, campuses can have free speech areas. Freedom of speech does not mean you can stand up and give a speech or a sermon or anything like that in the middle of my class. But it does mean that you cannot be punished for the content of that material. You can be punished for disrupting a group or a class or something like that, but you cannot be punished for the content of the speech.
I believe that the usual language for like the dangerous speech would be a call to action, right? So it's not just like, oh man, I hope that, someone hurts this guy, or it'd be, I'd be real happy if, this guy got hurt. It's, hey, John, go stab this guy.
Yes,
like,
it's
direct call
actually doing that. In fact, the courts in the past have upheld the right for you to vocally advocate illegal acts. You can say, I believe something should be done, but you can't start planning and say, you do this, you go get that, and you take care of this, and you do that. Okay. Do we have somebody?
Yeah, we're gonna do that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey sir, a few things. My name is Gabriel. I'm from Brazil. So this political discussion about First Amendment is not something that I'm culturally native to me. So some definitions of like some assistance understanding would be whenever it comes to upholding your right of free speech in areas of free speech. I've noticed recently an action from the government against like students that go like and chant, like for example, from river to the sea and stuff along those lines. At what moment, whenever they're given the visa from studenthood, can they stop expressing the same rights as us and become like some sort of second-class citizen, for lack of a better way to phrase it? If you could demonstrate some of those areas or those bounds where you think the government should follow.
Well, that's actually a very good question, and I will begin by admitting that I'm not a constitutional lawyer, and I will also suggest that we don't necessarily know exactly where the limit is. But again, the clear limit is that the content of the speech, unless it's designed to incite violence, the classic phrase is yelling fire in a crowded movie house. That is when there is no fire. Okay, speech that deliberately incites violence or speech that is obscene can be limited. It doesn't mean that it has to be, by the way. That's another thing that I talk to my students about. If any of you have been in my American government classes, I talk to my students about that. The government does not have to limit any speech, but speech that is either inciting violence or obscene, and again, there are a couple of other minor things dealing with like truth in advertising and stuff like that, where the government can enact rules and restrictions. But in general, the content of your speech cannot be punished. Now, again, that doesn't mean you can do it anywhere and at any time you want. There can be restrictions on the time and place and manner of you saying things. As I mentioned before, universities very often have free speech areas, but that means that you can't say the same thing in the middle of class on something completely different. You can't talk about politics in the middle of a chemistry class, right? Or you can be punished for that. But the content of your political cannot be punished, and that applies to everybody, citizens and non-citizens alike.
It's also strange right now, at least when it comes to the idea of like visas and citizenship here, and what they can do when it comes to free speech, because you have what they should be classified, because the Constitution says like people, it doesn't just say citizens. They should be under like the First Amendment right, but then the government does have the ability to take away visas, so they can't perform criminal actions against them, they can't like arrest them, but they can unfortunately take away visas. And that is something that we've been seeing like tossing up in the legal section. Can they do that when someone's enacting free speech? Is that an okay thing for the government to do? Problem is that it gets stopped in court because they already deport the people, and so it doesn't get furthered on. And so it's a very it's a difficult thing, and it's hard to parse it, especially when it gets stopped so often in the courts where you can't really further it.
Okay, you want to?
It goes beyond immigration enforcement problems. I mean, generally what can happen is, although you're not being punished for the content of the speech, the content of the speech can sometimes be used as a basis for enhanced government enforcement of separate legal issues. So for one example, we got visas. For other examples, we got current talks about revoking broadcasting licenses for some broadcasters that are publishing. And I kind of want to raise, is that a First Amendment violation?
That's an interesting argument, and by the way, another thing that's happening is the current administration wants to crack down on flag burning. The courts have said, again, the content of the speech of burning a flag in and of itself is protected by the First Amendment. But what the current administration is looking to do is to punish people based on other things that are not related to the content directly, such as reckless endangerment, creating a fire hazard, et cetera, and you can be punished for those things whether or not they involve a flag. But notice the administration is looking for those other things. They can't come out directly and say, we are going to punish you for burning a flag. They're saying specific, they can make it sound that way. I mean, you know, public relations and speechwriters can work it to make it sound as though we're going to punish people for burning. We want people to respect the flag. We're going to punish people for burning the flag. But legally, they are looking for other ways to do it. And so these other things, like broadcast licenses, the broadcast spectrum is limited. And so that's used as part of the rationale for granting licenses to broadcasters instead of just letting anybody broadcast whatever they want. The broadcast spectrum is limited, and you can't have we don't want 2 or 3 or 4 broadcasters competing for the same airwaves, for the same electromagnetic spectrum. And so what we do is we grant licenses that say you can use this channel, you can use that channel, you can use that channel, but those licenses are based on what the FCC has traditionally said is serving the public interest. So again, their licenses can't necessarily be revoked just for the speech, but that doesn't mean that an unsympathetic administration can come along and say, well, we don't think you're serving the public interest, and therefore we're going to revoke your license. So that's a kind of sophistry of language trying to work around it, but the actual content cannot be, again, unless it's deemed to be obscene or dangerous. And in the case of broadcasts, there's a third category called indecent speech, but indecent speech cannot be banned. It can only be regulated as to the time. Okay. Yeah, oh yeah, you were next.
I think we've seen an abuse from the current administration of an attack on free speech, and not necessarily because of the speech itself, but like you were saying, of the actions and the ways they can go about it. Because under the First Amendment, we are protected to say whatever we want and think whatever we want, but the vehicles in which we carry that out are under attack. Whether it's protesting, they've been able to get people on like collusion charges and like rioting, even through peaceful protesting or flag burning, like Professor brought up with the how it's causing a danger. Even though like our specific words are protected, our vehicles are not, and I think that's just as much of a threat that we aren't taking into account as what's our words if we don't have the vehicle to speak out. It doesn't mean anything.
I just wanted to address something. I saw something in the news a few weeks ago, and it happened within a day, and there was a lot of discussion about it within the news. It was talking about how the current administration tried to, if it looked at if a city council or a city or county, if they try to include themselves in the organization that's called Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, which is boycotting all the companies that go to Israel, then they have the right to reserve FEMA funds to these cities or counties. I was wondering if that's permissible under.
Well, again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know exactly, but that's the kind of thing that governments have often used to try and get around the First Amendment. So in other words, they may not be punished for their actual speech, but for taking an action, like joining a group that specifically advocates or takes steps to sort of thwart government policy. okay? And the government does have the right to determine where funds go and where funds don't, unless that is automatically determined by law, for example, or by the Constitution. So that's a kind of a gray area. But yes, that's a way that many governments have been used to try to get around the First Amendment. So we've got a bunch of people. I think you were next.
Can I just jump in really quick too? Also, if there's a question that me and Professor Cavalli can't answer, like Professor Cavalli isn't a constitutional professor, law person in the Constitution, and I have taken one con law class. So, but there is going to be an event next Wednesday at noon in Hogue Auditorium where there is a bunch of people helping out, so they can answer those questions too. Just to check in.
Parentheses.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, Lisa, I need
All right, Ainsley, why don't you go while he's signing in?
Hi, so I've actually been thinking about this a lot recently, particularly in relation to like conspiracy theories. So recently, over like the past year, I've heard an increase in, mainly it's that anti-vax rhetoric, like people encouraging other people not to vaccinate their kids and do things like drink raw milk. And like obviously we all know that this is some extremely dangerous stuff and like it's had serious consequences. So I've just been thinking, how do we reconcile the freedom of free speech with the actual threat that these type of words are causing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And false statements, and of course, I don't know the specific statements of debate. I do know, of course, yes, there have been there are debates over vaccines, and there are conspiracy theories about vaccines and all sorts of things. There are conspiracy theories about UFOs, for that matter. False speech is not automatically unprotected. False speech could be protected by the First Amendment as well. So that's one of those gray areas. But if it is, again, if it is speech that gets into the area of taking action, okay, again, I'm not the lawyer, and hopefully somebody will correct me, but if you are about to get a vaccine and somebody bursts in to wherever you are and says, wait, shout out, stop, don't do that, it's going to kill you, and that interrupts your getting the vaccine, that might be something that's actionable. But whether something is questionable or false in and of itself is not necessarily does not necessarily automatically mean that it can be punished or that it is not protected by the First Amendment. So that's one of those gray areas also.
Also, just when it comes to like those topics that are more like health oriented, a lot of those groups kind of like focus on like good things, or they do like supplements and stuff, where the supplement industry is kind of unregulated, but it's becoming a little bit more in some ways. Like if someone's giving like the wrong like vitamins or stuff, they can still have like some type of repercussions. Like same thing with raw milk. If they give someone raw milk that like poisons them in some way, there can be repercussions from that. But unfortunately, I think like spouting like the few health benefits there are to something dangerous is kind of in this like weird lull that isn't necessarily not protected as First Amendment speech. Although I will say, if anyone like doesn't know like farming practices, I feel like people use like weird words. Pasteurization is just boiling the milk. It's just a fancy way of saying boiling and filtering. If you do happen to like want to try unpasteurized because you don't trust the system, like just boil it, please. Just bring it to a boil to kill bacteria. I would just recommend that across the board.
Yeah, go ahead. You've been
I
waiting.
just had a thought about two things that were mentioned before, which were the flag burning, but most importantly the boycotts. That was really concerning when I saw that in the news, especially coming from a state like Texas, which claims to be so pro-Constitution. And there's a lot of things that I like that Texas does that support the Constitution. I tend to support the Constitution regardless of which party is doing it. But when I see them putting sanctions on people that boycott Israel, that's really concerning, because we have a lot of allies around the world, and that's the only country that's been done for. I also saw a Columbia University student that was indicted for burning an Israeli flag, and to be fair with context, it was someone else's flag, so there was already a crime there. But they tried to say that because it's an Israeli flag, that it's a hate crime, and Israel is a nation, not a race. And so that was just really concerning when I saw that kind of favoritism.
To be quite honest, that's why we have courts, because people disagree on what constitutes, for example, a hate crime, short of anything that's black and white in the law. And so that's why things go to trial, to try and settle those disputes. And again, you pointed out that a lot of attempts to restrict speech, and by the way, I do want to say, just as an aside, I talk about this in my American government class. If we are all asked or surveyed, do you support the First Amendment, do you support free speech, everybody's going to say yes, okay? But in truth, we try to limit people's speech all the time. We do it all the time. We try to do it all the time. What I was going to get at is with, again, what you're suggesting is that there are ways that governments are taking to get around that, not punishing people specifically for the actual speech, but punishing them for something around that, like taking the flag from somebody else, stealing it.
And that was a crime that in a lot of other cases, at a lot of other protests, when it was an American flag or a Mexican flag, that wasn't prosecuted the same way.
Right.
You know, it almost seems as if that was just the vessel that was used to come after them.
The flag burning case was Texas versus Johnson in 1984, and Gregory Johnson, who was a member of the Communist Party, burned a flag at the footsteps of an arena in Dallas where the Republican presidential convention was being held. And he was immediately arrested for breaking a Texas law that made it a crime to desecrate the Texas or American flags. And that's the law that the Supreme Court overturned. Everybody on the Supreme Court said, we don't like this guy. We think he's a horrible guy. By the way, he's still around and he's still active. But they said, we don't like this guy. But what he did is protected speech. They might, again, you might be able to punish him for disorderly conduct. You might be able to punish him for creating a fire hazard, et cetera, et cetera. But if you can't do those things, the courts have said you can't punish him just for flag desecration. Okay, who else do we have over here?
And I also was going to mention, at least recently, for I think one of the most recent flag burnings, they arrested them because in the park that they burned the flag in, it was illegal to start fires. So it's just like...
That's the way, trying to get around not doing it for the speech specifically, but for other reasons. Yeah, go ahead.
Two things. So the first thing is that a lot of these crimes, like disturbing the peace and stuff like that, are state crimes, not federal enforced crimes. So we kind of have this issue where the federal government is trying to expand its jurisdiction just to kind of selectively enforce. It's not even really selectively enforce. It's going beyond their enforcement abilities just for political
And as distasteful as it might be, they do have a certain amount of leverage over states. So in other words, what they could say is, if you don't enforce your law, then we will withhold all of these funds that you desperately need and that you've told us you desperately need. And states who are always short on funds, and again, anybody in my American government class, I've talked about that before, will often gladly accept the funds, and they'll do whatever the federal government, they're like addicts, okay? They need that money, and so they'll do whatever the federal government says. And so that's a way around it. We'll go to you, and then, well, you determine it, Anita. We'll go to him first.
I guess I'm raising the question do you guys think we need more protections to the First Amendment? We've seen that it is very, I don't want to say bland, but it's very up to interpretation. And of course, that was what our founding fathers intended almost 250 years ago. So I'm asking now that we're in a totally different age from when the First Amendment was published. Do we need more protections for instances where you burn a flag in a park, but inside that park it's illegal to burn? Do we need extra protections to protect people from the law when they're exercising their First Amendment rights?
Now, I don't want to put you on the spot, but what kind of protections would you suggest?
I guess an extra laws and provisions in place to maybe say that if you're exercising and forming like a free speech thought, then you may, I guess you're less liable for prosecution of these other things.
Maybe I can give you one example that has actually come before the courts, and that is the fact that the protection for political speech outweighs the lack of protection for obscene speech. There was a case where a student wore a jacket that said "F the draft" back in the 1970s and was punished for wearing that jacket. And the court said, even though that was determined to be an obscene statement, the fact that it was a political statement about the draft, this is during the Vietnam War, overrode any punishment that could be done. So that's a sort of along the lines of what you might be suggesting.
And that's kind of the idea that I was getting at is that we need these extra sort of protections. So, you know, if a government comes into power that you don't necessarily agree with, they can't take these extra steps to say, oh, you know, burning a flag that you don't like is a hate crime, when genuinely you're just trying to protect your First Amendment rights.
That's the whole gray area. Who's next? Who's next?
So,
Go ahead.
whenever I assume whenever we're talking about like flag burnings, and I typically connect it with the stereotypical riots or protests, whatever you want to call it, earlier in the year, kind of in the past few months rising up. Something that I've noticed is, like, of course it's protected. Like, if you want to burn a flag gets burned, let's say statistically, at least one flag a day, right? Through freedom of speech, it's protected. But I feel whenever it becomes a public disturbance, if your intentions with a giant bonfire in the middle of an intersection, that's kind of a little bit more of a legal action to take to kind of disperse. Even though you have that right to do it, doesn't make it the right thing to do, you know? So, because obviously if you feel a certain way about a flag, no matter why you're burning it or with the intentions you have of burning it, you're protected to do so. But if you're disturbing the public and causing an unsafe scene, then that's whenever legal authority might be taken. That's just my thought on it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and again, the fact that you can do something doesn't mean we ought to stage an everybody burn a flag today day. You know, just because that can be done doesn't necessarily mean it should be done.
In response to that, I would say, like, the point of a protest is to show your inconformity. It's to show that even though you know there might be consequences for breaking certain laws, you have the backbone, or you feel emboldened enough by the cause of your calling to do those things. And I'm not advocating for you to get like special provisions on your First Amendment or stuff like that, because I feel like give people an inch, they take a mile. Then everything's political, and you can make the calling because I can't be tried for this, or I cannot be censored for this because everything's political speech. Disturbing the public, of course, it is something that must be done if the protests are getting out of hand, if public property is being destroyed, if it's becoming a reckless endangerment for everyone around. But I feel like what we're seeing right now is we're seeing such a bloodlust, a willingness of the government to go out and go through that process to get people who are willfully engaging in rhetoric that it does not like. So everybody knew, like, before you could get, like, these are not new things. You could have getting prosecuted for burning a flag even before what's happening right now. But the fact that it's more prevalent now, that people are getting prosecuted because of it, it's a change in the norms. Before, the rate of people that might have been prosecuted because of that, because it was actually, well, not because of what he's saying we're not liking it, but because he's actually burning a fire where he's not supposed to, the probability that might be prosecuted might have been smaller. But now it's more prevalent. Now we're seeing a government that is very much willful to take up those battles in court against people who might not have the funds or the means to defend themselves. And that ultimately speaks to you, and it speaks to me. I know that I personally do not have money for a lawyer, and I don't think a lot of people here do. But the fact that I have to take that into account now when I want to exercise my free speech is very telling for all of us.
Just one specific point to answer something you just mentioned is that you, of course, the government is obligated to provide you a lawyer if you can't afford one. And they have also said that you must be afforded the lawyer of your choice. In other words, the government can't just say, hey, you go defend this guy, if we don't know who this person is and if they're completely incompetent. You can request another lawyer. So you do have that. Okay. Yeah.
I was kind
Oh,
of,
okay. You can wait. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna kind of piggyback back to what he said. A good chance that the government's like prosecuting more people for burning flags is they're probably like scared of like a revolution or something happening again. Typically, when a government gets stricter, they get worried about what people are doing. So I mean, that doesn't really go. That doesn't really go back to freedom of speech. More than likely, the more people grow a backbone and are saying things against the government, the more they're going to want to prosecute us to stop us from doing things. So they still have power.
Yeah, so about disturbing the peace, one problem with that is that, let's say if everyone in this room was like pro-American flag, but I burned an American flag right here and everyone here started like throwing stuff and getting angry at me, I was expressing my view, but now because of everyone's response, it's now disturbing the peace. And one example of that was in Atlanta with the state government, the Stop Cop City protests. They had one individual who got involved in a police-involved shooting. He's deceased. But because of that, the organizers of the protest were charged with racketeering for something they had no involvement in. So I understand the need to keep the peace and for enforcing disturbing the peace laws, but then it also gets used like that, where the person expressing their view had no responsibility to the subsequent actions that came, but still they are responsible for what
Yeah, those RICO laws, governments this is not uncommon. Governments come up with, let's say, novel ways of using laws that were never designed for a particular purpose. Those RICO laws were for like gangs and the mafia and things like that, but they are increasingly used for exactly the kind of thing you're talking about.
Their charges were dismissed yesterday.
Over here? Go ahead.
I think the most concerning trend that I've seen in all the examples that we've talked about, from flag burning to protests to boycotts, is that it's a really slippery slope when we stray it at all from the Constitution. So you saw this in the immigration problem. So when people that have a visa, or they are citizens now, but they're immigrants, when they say something that someone doesn't like and we in any way come after them for it, that's a really slippery slope. You see that in other countries. It's a massive problem, to the point where in the UK people are being arrested for thought crimes or for praying in a public space. It's a really slippery slope when they're prosecuted for those things. But it's also a slippery slope to say that because my intent was to exercise free speech, I now get to commit crimes, because where does that end as well? So if you truly are just expressing free speech, then you shouldn't face any prosecution. But I don't see a reason why you should get an exception to committing crimes because your main intent was to exercise free speech.
That's actually a good point, and it leads me to bring up something that I wanted to mention before. In that thing next week, I'm going to be one of the speakers, and one of the things I'm going to talk about is that the First Amendment covers more than just speech itself. So there are two other related items, and that is the right to assembly and the right to petition the government. So people can get together in groups and organize. That's why we have interest groups, for better or for worse. That's why we have all these outside groups, because they have a constitutional right. People do have the right to organize a protest, to publicly go out and say they disagree with government policy. And so those two things, plus freedom of speech, tend to mean that people can get together, they can go protest, but again, it doesn't necessarily mean you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, wherever you want. And there's a big gray area in the middle there that we're, to this day, 250 years later, still trying to figure out. So
I know we've been talking a lot more about present day applications to the First Amendment, but I think it's kind of important to think about why we even have that in the first place on a lot of the Bill of Rights. When you think about it, a lot of the items and the amendments there are grievances that we had when the colonists were just first under the British Crown. Because of that, they felt that it was important to include those items in the Constitution to guarantee those rights and that they were protected, mainly by the Second Amendment, because that's what started the whole American Revolution, was the seizing of arms at Lexington and Concord. Those rights needed to be protected, but the important thing is that I kind of lost my train of thought, my apologies. But like, it's important to think about the historical context of why we even have that in the first place, because those things being infringed upon is why they need to be protected. I think I rambled on a little bit, but.
Okay, okay, go ahead.
I mean, I kind of just have one thing to say. It's like, what's the point of a protest if it's in silence and in private? I mean, the whole point of a protest and assembly is to get out there and to speak your mind. Well, what's the point if we're going to keep having these restrictions? Like, oh, you can't go protest in the street because you're interrupting traffic. Oh, you can't burn a flag because it's a fire hazard. Oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. Eventually, we're just going to have to sit at home and like be angry on Twitter all day, and that's not going to get anything done.
There was a very well-known anti-Vietnam War protester, one of the people who disrupted the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago. I'm blanking, it was Tom something. He was, anyway, one of the things he said is, we're not going to protest politely so you can dismiss us. He said, we're going to be loud and we're going to be in your face. And again, this gets to that gray area that you were bringing up before. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to get together. You're allowed to, again, you can't be punished for the content of your speech. But when does that bleed into disorderly conduct, for example? So that's the real question. But yes, you want to protest, you want to make sure that you are letting the government know you do have a right to petition. Again, First Amendment says the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So you actually do have a right to make sure the government hears you. And so that's a good point to bring up. Who's next over here?
So in regards to this, we're talking about a lot. Thank you for bringing that up. That goes through the retaliation principle of the thing that I was trying to understand. So as an immigrant, whenever I hear free speech, I hear, hey, you can say whatever you want and get away with it. But what I'm seeing here is a consistent shadowing of your speech. It's an obfuscation of your ability of carrying out what you're trying to say. So to put it bluntly, is now that we are in the 21st century, we have all these means of communication and propaganda that's been thrown at us 24/7, marketing and all that, lobbying, etc. Us as citizens, how can we fully exert our First Amendment to the capability that it was intended to be utilized with the obfuscation, the smoke tactics that the government has because of its unending budget? How can we go back to that and be heard? And that's the direction I wanted to get to you guys, is how can we be loud and obnoxious and not be retaliated with these abuses of bureaucratic behavior?
Okay, I just want to make sure, did you guys get a chance to sign the attendance sheets? Okay.
Did everybody get a chance to sign the attendance sheet?
Not me.
Okay, send it over this way, okay. Oh, you took the pen, you stole our pen. Which is not covered by the First Amendment, by the way.
I would say to that, for now, we can't. As people, we don't have us as individuals, we don't have the capability to be impervious to any repercussions they may have for having free speech or for saying something that the government might not like. However, it's not something that we should start doing. Also, as a person who comes from Colombia, from South America, I know there's a lot of people in the continent that just don't say things because of the repercussions third-party actors or the government itself might have. And it's astonishing to see stuff like that happening here in the United States. So people might not talk because of the repercussions the government itself might have with them. It is a process. I would say that right now there's nothing us ourselves can do, but having these talks are important because it emboldens people. And even if we have to have the fights as an individual in courts with the support of other people, that is important. And then also engaging in the democratic process, voting for people who might not only protect your freedom of speech, but everyone's, even if we do not like it.
Okay, thank you.
I wish I had a better answer or response to that, but that's a really interesting point to bring up. It does seem to be more of like a a quiet sort of layer of silence and not so in your face so it doesn't get noticed as much. But with the point about protesting and doing it quietly, of course there's no point in having a silent protest, but also we're talking about flag burning being a regular thing, and I don't know how many damn flags it's going to take for a difference to be made. You know, clearly it's not an efficient means of protesting, and in a capitalistic society, destroying capital does get a lot of attention in protests. It forces corporations and then sometimes politicians, in response, it forces them to have to say something. But when we've had, I would think, a decent amount of protests in recent years, since like 2020, I would say, that have caused a lot of destruction, and then there's still not necessarily differences being made. I just feel like it's time to look somewhere else. And maybe it doesn't have to do with the First Amendment, I'm not really sure.
I think he also had a quick.
Yeah,
Okay,
just,
quick comment?
Just one quick thing, and I think that you'd agree with this. I'm kind of responding to you. I think that you agree with this, on its pace, but I don't know about the specific example. So the common phrase, your rights stop where other people start, right? So one of the largest ones is the free travel. You don't get to tell me where I have to go, where I can go. And so the only thing, I guess, that you mentioned that I have a problem with, because I have no problem with, protesters loud in your face, be heard, like he said, you have a right to, for the government to hear your grievances. But when you're blocking the road of ordinary people, not the people that make decisions, people that a lot of them might not even care, they have no clue what you're protesting, you're just blocking the road. Hey, I need to get to work, I need to get to school, I need to get here. I don't think that you have a right to block the road there. I think that you should take it, but I do think that you have a right to block the conduct of the people that are actually making the decisions. So I think you should take it right to the people that have an actual influence.
Okay, two real quick final comments. Do you want to, before we wrap this up?
So, regarding political satire, is there any especially with political satire, nowadays, especially with, there was a recent Supreme Court case saying that yes, parodies were not defamation under the First Amendment, and that they were protected by.
They are protected by the First Amendment, yes.
But is there to what extent are political satire or parodies of someone, to which extent are they until they're defamation or slander?
Well, again, only if they extend into obscene or dangerous speech. That's really it. Okay. Who has the last word? Okay. Somebody here? Just very quickly. I know it's impossible.
I guess I'll use my last word to respond to you. The whole point is to make your voice heard with the First Amendment. And I think if we start to put limitations on where your voice can be heard and who can hear your voice, it's a very dangerous place and a dangerous road to start to go down, because who is going to start to decide that? It's the people in power. What are you going to do about that?
Okay, on that note.
Yeah, I want to thank you all for coming here. There's so much great discussion. I'm so sorry that we couldn't get to everybody's thoughts on everything, but I think that just shows that this was absolutely amazing that there would be so many people and so many opinions. If you guys would want to come to more meetings, we meet here pretty often. There's also the First Amendment event this upcoming Wednesday on the 17th. If you have more questions, if you want to hear more about your First Amendment rights, especially as a student on campus, please go to that. And of course, we'll be continuing to do meetings, events. We sometimes have professors come to talk to students about things, so you can get better perspective. You can just talk to a professor about things. We also are trying to do more events. Last year, we were able to go to the state capitol for an event to get to tour the capitol. If you guys would want to be more involved, we also have a student representative, Miss Alyssa over here. If you want to do something like that, please reach out. I have our GroupMe code here. We have an Instagram, all that fun stuff. So yeah, thank you all for coming.
Next week in Hogue Auditorium, Wednesday at noon.
It's always good. Hey, I like that. She'll see here.